The Montana Territory didn't forgive mistakes. Eliza Hartwell learned this standing beside a wagon that smelled like broken promises and horse sweat. The wood was split in three places. One wheel leaned at an angle that suggested the axle had given up days ago. Her trunk sat in the dirt beside it, leather straps bleached white by a sun that had no mercy for Eastern girls who thought they understood hard work. She didn't cry, couldn't afford to waste the water. The letter in her hand had been read so many times the paper was soft as cloth. Dear Miss Hartwell, circumstances have changed. I regret any inconvenience. Please do not proceed to Montana. I have made other arrangements. Other arrangements, like she was a shipment of grain he'd decided not to purchase. The wagon driver, a man named Duluth who smelled like tobacco and indifference, had left her here with a shrug. Can't take you back, miss. Paid for one direction. That's what you get. Then he'd climbed back onto his rig and disappeared into the heat shimmer, leaving her standing at the edge of a property she'd never seen, waiting for a man who wasn't coming. The ranch stretched out before her like a dare. Fence posts marched toward the horizon in crooked lines. A barn that had seen better decades leaned against the wind. The house itself looked functional, nothing more. Weathered wood, a porch that didn't sag, windows that probably kept out most of the cold. Smoke rose from the chimney in a thin gray line. Someone was home. Eliza picked up her trunk. It wasn't heavy. She'd sold most of what she owned to pay for the journey, but her arms shook anyway. 3 months on trains and stagecoaches. 3 months sleeping in boarding houses that charged by the hour and served beans that tasted like tin. 3 months imagining a different ending to this story. She made it 10 steps before her legs quit. The trunk hit the ground. Eliza followed, sitting hard in the dust, and pressed her palms against her eyes. The sun beat down on her neck. Her dress, the good one she'd saved for meeting her intended, was ruined, hem black with road dirt, sleeves torn from helping push the wagon out of a rut 2 days back. She'd left Philadelphia with a plan. A respectable marriage to a Montana landowner named Thomas Garrett, arranged through letters and a cousin's recommendation. She'd imagined a modest home, honest work, maybe children someday. Nothing grand, just a life that was hers. Instead, she got this: dust and silence and the crushing weight of having no options left. You hurt? Eliza's head snapped up. A man stood 20 feet away, backlit by the sun so she couldn't see his face. Tall, broad through the shoulders in a way that came from work, not leisure. He wore a hat with a bent brim and held a rifle loosely in one hand, barrel pointed at the ground. I said, "Are you hurt?" His voice had the texture of someone who didn't waste words. No. Eliza pushed herself to her feet, brushing dirt from her skirt. I was supposed to meet someone. Thomas Garrett. Is this his land? The man stepped closer, and she saw his face. Weathered. Maybe 40, maybe older. A scar cut through one eyebrow, pale against tanned skin. His eyes were the color of creek water. Not pretty, just clear. He looked at her the way someone might look at a problem they were trying to figure out. Used to be Garrett's place, he said. Sold it to me 8 months ago. Took his money and left for California. The words landed like stones. He's gone? Eliza heard her voice crack and hated it. When did he leave? February. 3 months before she'd even started the journey. 3 months he'd known and hadn't bothered to send word until she was already halfway across the country. The man, Caleb Ward, she'd learn later, shifted the rifle to his other hand. You got people around here? No. Money for a ticket back? No. He was quiet for a moment, looking at her trunk, the busted wagon, the empty road behind her. Then he sighed, a sound that suggested this wasn't the first mess he'd dealt with today. Well, he said, can't leave you out here? Sun'll cook you by nightfall. He gestured toward the house. Come on. Eliza didn't move. I'm not asking for charity. Didn't say you were. I can work. I'm not useless. I'm not. Never said that either. Caleb started walking toward the house, expecting her to follow. When she didn't, he stopped and turned back. Look, Miss Hartwell, Eliza Hartwell. Miss Hartwell. I'm offering you a place to sleep and a meal. You can decide what comes after that when you're not half dead from the heat. That sound reasonable? It did. She hated that it did. Eliza picked up her trunk again. This time, she made it all the way to the porch. The inside of the house was cooler, darker. Eliza's eyes took a moment to adjust. One main room served as kitchen and living area, with a stone fireplace on the far wall and a table that looked hand-built. A narrow hallway led to what she assumed were bedrooms. The place was clean but sparse. No curtains, no rugs, no photographs on the walls. A man's house, lived in but not decorated. Caleb set the rifle on a rack near the door. You can take the back room. Used to be storage, but there's a bed frame in there. Probably needs airing out. I don't want to impose us. You already said that. He filled a cup with water from a pitcher and handed it to her. Drink. She did. The water tasted like metal in heaven. When's the last time you ate? He asked. Yesterday morning. Figures. He moved to the stove and started pulling things out of a cupboard. Bread, dried meat, something that might have been cheese. Sit. Eliza sat. Her whole body ached in ways she hadn't noticed while standing. The chair was hard wood, but it felt like luxury. Caleb put food in front of her without ceremony. She tried to eat slowly, but her hands had other ideas. The bread was dense and slightly stale. She didn't care. It was fuel, and she was empty. He sat across from her, watching her eat with the same assessing look from earlier. Not judgmental, just measuring. So what was the plan? He asked. You and Garrett. Eliza swallowed. Marriage. He needed a wife. I needed... She stopped. No point explaining the specifics. It doesn't matter now. Guess not. Do you know where he went? In California? No idea. Man kept to himself even before he left. She nodded, staring at the bread in her hands. California might as well be the moon. You got other options? Caleb asked. Family back east? A sister in Philadelphia, married. Eliza didn't mention that her sister's husband had made it clear there was no room in their home for unwed relations who couldn't support themselves. I can't go back there. Why not? Because I burned that bridge when I left. She met his eyes. I'm not going back to be someone's burden. Caleb leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. So what are you going to do? I don't know yet. Fair enough. They sat in silence while she finished eating. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling something loose on the barn. Caleb glanced toward the window, then back at her. Here's how this works, he said. You can stay until you figure things out. There's work if you want it. I run this place alone, and I'm behind on everything. I'll pay you what I can, which isn't much. Room and board plus a little extra. Enough to save for a ticket somewhere, if that's what you decide. Eliza studied him. Why would you do that? Because leaving you on the road would make me an asshole, and I've got enough problems without adding that to the list. You don't know me. Don't need to. You're here. You need help. I've got space. He stood up. Think it over. I've got fences to mend before dark. He walked out, letting the door close softly behind him. Eliza sat alone in the quiet house, trying to make sense of what had just happened. A stranger had offered her work, shelter, and a way forward, expecting nothing in return. It felt wrong. In her experience, men didn't help women without wanting something. But Caleb Ward had looked at her like she was a problem to solve, not prey to hunt. There was a difference. She finished the water, stood, and went to find the back room. The room was small. A bed frame, a washstand, a single window that looked out over brown hills. Dust covered everything. Eliza found a rag in the kitchen and spent the next hour scrubbing surfaces, shaking out the thin mattress, trying to make the space livable. Her hands were already blistered from the journey. The work made them worse. She didn't care. Work was better than thinking. When the room was as clean as she could make it, Eliza sat on the edge of the bed and let herself feel it, the weight of every choice that had led her here. Leaving Philadelphia, trusting a man she'd never met, believing in a future that had evaporated before she even arrived. She'd been so sure, so certain that marriage to Thomas Garrett would be her salvation. Instead, it was Caleb Ward, a stranger with a scarred face and a quiet offer, who'd kept her from dying in the dust. The irony wasn't lost on her. By evening, Eliza had unpacked her trunk and washed the worst of the road off her skin using water from the washstand. She changed into a simpler dress, tied her hair back, and ventured out to find Caleb. He was in the barn, hammering something that looked like a broken stall door. The space smelled like hay and animal warmth, though she didn't see any horses. "Sold the last one 2 months ago," Caleb said, noticing her gaze. "Couldn't afford to keep feeding them. Just got the milk cow now." Eliza stepped closer. "What can I do?" He paused mid-swing. "You serious?" "You offered me work. I'm accepting." "Didn't mean you had to start tonight." "I'm not sitting in that house feeling useless." She crossed her arms. "Tell me what needs doing." Caleb set down the hammer and looked at her, really looked, like he was trying to decide if she'd break under pressure. Whatever he saw must have satisfied him, because he nodded. "All right, see those feed sacks in the corner? Need them stacked against the north wall. Keep the rats from getting in." It was simple work. Heavy, but simple. Eliza rolled up her sleeves and got to it. They worked in silence, him fixing the door, her moving sacks. The rhythm was strangely calming, no conversation required, just tasks and the satisfaction of completing them. After an hour, Caleb called it. "That's enough for tonight." Eliza's shoulders screamed in protest, but she kept her face neutral. "What time do you start in the morning?" "Sunup." "I'll be ready." He gave her a look that might have been respect. "We'll see." Dinner was beans and cornbread, eaten at the same table where she'd had her first meal. Caleb wasn't much for conversation. He ate quickly, methodically, like a man who saw food as fuel and nothing more. Eliza matched his pace. "How long have you had this place?" 8 months, like I said. Bought it from Garrett when he decided Montana wasn't for him." "Why'd you want it?" Caleb shrugged. "Needed land. This was available." "You from around here?" "Wyoming, originally. Worked cattle ranches for 15 years, saved enough to buy my own place. This was what I could afford." He pushed his plate aside. "Your turn. What made you think marrying a stranger was a good idea?" Eliza bristled, but the question was fair. "I was a seamstress in Philadelphia. Worked for a woman who paid badly and treated me worse. My sister married a man with money, and he made it clear I wasn't welcome in their home long term. Thomas Garrett's cousin was a client of mine. She showed me his letters. He seemed decent. Honest work, honest intentions. Better than what I had. And now? Now I'm here." She met his eyes. "Making the best of it." Caleb nodded slowly. "That's about all anyone can do." The first week passed in a blur of work. Eliza learned the rhythms of the ranch, feeding the cow, collecting eggs from the chickens she hadn't known existed, hauling water, mending fences that seemed determined to fall apart. Her hands blistered, then calloused. Her back ached. She collapsed into bed each night too tired to dream. Caleb worked beside her most days, showing her how to do things without making her feel incompetent. He didn't hover, didn't micromanage, just demonstrated once and expected her to remember. She did. By the second week, they'd fallen into an unspoken partnership. Caleb handled the heavy labor, splitting wood, repairing the barn roof, digging a new drainage ditch. Eliza took over the kitchen, the garden, the smaller maintenance tasks. It wasn't perfect. The land fought them at every turn. But slowly, incrementally, things improved. They didn't talk much. Caleb wasn't the talking type, and Eliza had nothing to say that wouldn't sound like self-pity. But silence between them became comfortable. They existed in parallel, two people solving the same problems from different angles. At night, Eliza counted the money Caleb paid her. Small amounts, carefully doled out each week. It wasn't much. Wouldn't be enough for a train ticket east for months, maybe longer. She wasn't sure she wanted to leave anyway. 3 weeks in, the well ran dry. Eliza discovered it in the morning, cranking the handle and getting nothing but air. She cranked again. Still nothing. Caleb came out of the barn, took one look at her face, and swore. "How bad?" she asked. "Bad." He peered down into the well, then straightened. "We'll have to haul from the creek until I can dig deeper. That's a 2-day job minimum." "What do you need me to do?" "Help me carry." They spent the day hauling buckets from the creek a quarter-mile away, back and forth, over and over, until Eliza's arms felt like they'd fall off. The sun was relentless, sweat soaked through her dress. Blisters that had just healed opened up again. She didn't complain. Caleb noticed anyway. That evening, he handed her a tin of salve. "For your hands." "I'm fine." "Use it anyway." She did. The salve smelled terrible, but worked. By morning, the worst of the pain had dulled. They hauled water for 3 more days while Caleb dug deeper into the well. Eliza helped when she could, lowering buckets, hauling up rocks. It was miserable work, dirty, exhausting, frustrating. But when water finally flowed again, the relief was overwhelming. "That'll hold through summer," Caleb said, washing his face in the newly filled trough. "Maybe longer." Eliza leaned against the well, catching her breath. "What happens if it runs dry again?" "We haul from the creek. And if the creek dries up?" Caleb looked at her, his expression unreadable. "Then we're in trouble." It wasn't reassuring, but it was honest. A month into her stay, a rider appeared on the horizon. Eliza spotted him from the garden, where she was pulling weeds that grew faster than anything useful. She called for Caleb, who emerged from the barn with the rifle. The rider was an older man, thin and weathered, riding a horse that had seen better years. He raised a hand in greeting as he approached. "Ward," he said, nodding at Caleb. Then his eyes shifted to Eliza. "Ma'am." "Rollins." Caleb didn't lower the rifle. "What brings you out here?" "Just making rounds. Heard you had company." Rollins gave Eliza a look that wasn't quite suspicious, but wasn't friendly either. "Didn't know you were a married man, Ward." "I'm not." "Ah." Rollins' expression shifted into something knowing. "Well, that's your business, I suppose." Eliza felt her face heat. She opened her mouth to explain, hired help, temporary arrangement, perfectly respectable. But Caleb spoke first. "You got a point, Rollins, or are you just here to gossip?" The older man chuckled. "No offense meant. Just surprised is all. You've been alone out here long enough, figured you liked it that way." "I did." "And now?" "Now I've got help." Caleb's tone made it clear the conversation was over. "Anything else?" Rollins tipped his hat. "Just being neighborly. You need anything? You know where to find me." He rode off, leaving a silence that felt heavier than before. Eliza turned to Caleb. "People are going to talk." "Let them. It'll reflect on you." "Don't care." "I do." She crossed her arms. "I won't have people thinking I'm—" "Thinking what? That you're a woman who needed help and took it?" Caleb met her eyes. "Anyone who judges you for that isn't worth worrying about." "Easy for you to say. You're not the one they'll call names." "True." He turned back toward the barn. "But you're also not the kind of woman who cares what small men think. So what does it matter?" He walked away before she could respond. Eliza stood in the garden, dirt under her fingernails, sweat cooling on her skin, and realized he was right. She didn't care what Rollins thought, didn't care what anyone thought. She cared about the work, about pulling her weight, about building something that wouldn't collapse the moment she looked away. Everything else was noise. The summer wore on, brutal and unforgiving. Drought set in. The garden struggled despite Eliza's best efforts. The grass turned brown, dust coated everything. Caleb watched the sky like a man waiting for a miracle that wouldn't come. "Rain's late this year," he said one evening, staring at the cloudless horizon. "How late?" "Month? Maybe more." "What happens if it doesn't come?" He didn't answer, didn't need to. They rationed water, cut back on washing, let the garden wither except for the hardiest plants. It felt like fighting a losing battle. But they fought anyway because the alternative was giving up. Eliza learned what it meant to be bone-tired, to ache in places she hadn't known could ache, to fall asleep the moment her head hit the pillow and wake before dawn to do it all again. She also learned that she was stronger than she'd thought, stronger than the girl who'd left Philadelphia expecting someone else to solve her problems, stronger than the woman who'd stood beside an abandoned wagon and felt her future crumble. Out here, strength wasn't optional. It was survival. 2 months in, Caleb found her crying behind the barn. She didn't hear him approach, didn't realize he was there until he cleared his throat. Eliza wiped her face quickly, turning away. "I'm fine." "Doesn't look like it." "It's nothing, just tired." Caleb leaned against the barn wall, not leaving but not pushing either. "You want to talk about it?" "No." "Fair enough." They stood in silence. Eliza tried to pull herself together, but the tears kept coming. She was so tired, tired of working, tired of fighting, tired of pretending she wasn't terrified that one wrong move would send her right back to having nothing. "I thought it would be easier," she said finally. "Out here. I thought, I don't know what I thought. That the West was some kind of promised land? Maybe. It's not." Caleb's voice was quiet. "It's just land, hard land. Takes more than it gives most days." "Then why stay?" "Because it's mine." He looked at her. "Or it will be once I finish paying for it. That means something." Eliza understood. Ownership, agency, control over your own fate, even if that fate was brutal. "You're doing good work," Caleb added. "Better than I expected." "That's not saying much." "It is. Coming from me." He pushed off the wall. "Come on, there's beans on the stove and they're not getting any warmer." He walked back toward the house, leaving her alone. Eliza let herself cry for another minute. Then she wiped her face, straightened her shoulders, and followed. Then, by late summer, something shifted. Not dramatically, not obviously, just small things. Caleb started asking her opinion on decisions, where to allocate resources, which repairs to prioritize. Eliza caught herself looking forward to the evenings, when they'd sit on the porch and watch the sunset over the dry hills, not talking, just existing in the same space. They were becoming a unit, not a couple, but partners in a way that felt more solid than romance. One evening, Eliza was mending a shirt, Caleb's, torn from catching on barbed wire, when he spoke. "You ever think about what comes next?" She looked up. "Next?" "After here. When you've saved enough to leave." Eliza set down the shirt. She'd been asking herself the same question for weeks. "I don't know. I thought I did, but—" She paused. "What about you? What's your plan?" "Same as it's always been. Make this place work. Build something that lasts." "Alone?" Caleb met her eyes. "Maybe not." The words hung between them, heavy with implication. Eliza felt her heart speed up. "Caleb, I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "Just saying, if you wanted to stay, long term, there'd be a place for you here." "As what?" "Whatever you want." He looked away, uncomfortable. "Partner. Co-owner, eventually. I'm not good at this, but you've proven yourself. You work harder than most men I've hired. You don't quit when things get bad. That's worth something." Eliza's throat tightened. "You're offering me half your ranch." "Not half, not yet, but yeah, something like that." "Why?" "Because I trust you." He said it simply, like it was obvious. "And because I think you'd say yes to a partnership before you'd say yes to anything else." He was right. She would. "I need to think about it," Eliza said. "Take your time." But even as she said it, she knew what her answer would be. She'd come to Montana looking for security in the form of marriage. Instead, she'd found something better, a partnership built on mutual respect, hard work, and the understanding that survival required both of them. It wasn't what she'd planned, but it was real. And maybe that was enough. 3 days passed before Eliza gave Caleb her answer. She spent those days working, thinking, watching him move through his routines with the same steady determination that had kept this place running before she arrived. He didn't press her, didn't ask again, just waited, fixing fence posts and hauling feed like her decision didn't matter one way or the other. But it did matter. She could see it in the way he glanced at her when he thought she wasn't looking. On the third evening, she found him on the porch, cleaning his rifle. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that would have been beautiful if the land beneath wasn't so parched. "I'll stay," Eliza said. Caleb looked up, his hands going still on the cloth. "Yeah?" "On one condition." "Name it." "We draw up papers, legal ones. If I'm going to be a partner, I want it in writing, not just your word." Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or respect. "Fair enough. We'll ride into town next week. Get it done proper." Eliza sat down beside him, her back against the porch rail. "I'm not good at depending on people." "Notice that. So if this goes wrong, it won't." "You don't know that." Caleb set the rifle aside and turned to face her fully. "No. But I know you don't quit when things get hard, and I know I'm better at this with you here than I ever was alone. That's enough to build on." She wanted to argue, to list all the ways this could fall apart, but the words wouldn't come, because he was right. They worked. Not perfectly, not smoothly, but they worked. All right, she said quietly. Partners. Caleb extended his hand. Eliza shook it, feeling the calluses on his palm match her own. For the first time since leaving Philadelphia, she felt like she'd made the right choice. The feeling lasted exactly 4 days. That's when the letter arrived. Rollins brought it, along with a knowing smirk that made Eliza want to throw something at his head. Mail for Miss Hartwell, he announced, like he was delivering news instead of an envelope. Came through the post office last week. Almost didn't recognize the name. Eliza took the letter, her stomach sinking at the sight of her sister's handwriting. Caleb appeared in the doorway behind her. Something wrong? Don't know yet. She waited until Rollins rode off before opening it. The letter was short, brutally short. Eliza, I heard from Mrs. Patterson that you went west to marry. I assume it didn't work out, since you haven't written. Jonathan says you can come stay with us if you're in trouble. There's a room in the attic. You'd need to help with the children and the housework, but it's better than whatever you're doing now. Let me know. Your sister Margaret. Eliza read it twice, then handed it to Caleb without a word. He scanned it quickly, his jaw tightening. Generous of her. She's offering help. She's offering you a servant's position in her own house. Caleb gave the letter back. That what you want? No? The word came out harder than she intended. But she's family. Family that made you feel like you had to cross a continent to escape them. Eliza folded the letter and shoved it in her pocket. She's still my sister, and you're still not going back there. You don't get to decide that. Caleb's expression didn't change, but something in his posture shifted. You're right, I don't. But I know you, Eliza. You'd rather dig ditches in the heat than take charity from someone who looks down on you. He was right. She hated that he was right. I need to respond, she said. Tell her I'm settled. Tell her you're staying. I am staying. Then say it like you mean it. Eliza met his eyes, seeing the challenge there. I mean it. Good. Caleb turned back toward the barn. We've got work to do. She wrote the letter that night, keeping it brief. Margaret, thank you for the offer, but I've found a position here. I'm managing a ranch as a partner. It's hard work, but it's mine. Give my regards to Jonathan and the children. Eliza. She didn't mention Caleb, didn't explain the details. Her sister would make assumptions no matter what she wrote, so why bother clarifying? The letter went out with the next mail rider, and Eliza tried not to think about it. Tried being the key word. Because 2 weeks later, Margaret's response arrived, and it was worse than the first. Eliza, what do you mean, partner? Are you married to this man? If not, what exactly are you doing on his ranch? People will talk. They probably already are. This is exactly the kind of recklessness that got you into trouble in the first place. Come home before you ruin what's left of your reputation. Margaret. Eliza crumpled the letter and threw it into the stove. Caleb watched from the table, saying nothing. She thinks I'm a fool, Eliza said, her voice shaking. Thinks I'm out here destroying my life. Are you? No. Then why does her opinion matter? Because she's my sister, because... Eliza stopped, pressing her hands against the counter. Because part of me wonders if she's right. Caleb stood up, crossing to where she stood. Look at me. She did. You've worked harder in the last 3 months than most people work in a year, he said. You've kept this place running when I couldn't do it alone. You've earned every dollar I've paid you and more. Anyone who can't see that isn't worth listening to. Even family? Especially family. His voice was firm. You don't owe them anything, Eliza. Not explanations, not apologies, nothing. She wanted to believe him, wanted to shake off Margaret's words like dust, but they clung to her anyway, settling into the cracks she thought she'd sealed. I'm going to check the fence line, Caleb added, grabbing his hat. You coming? Eliza shook her head. I need a minute. He left her alone in the kitchen, and she stood there staring at the stove where her sister's judgment had turned to ash. The work didn't stop because of family drama. If anything, it got worse. The drought deepened. The well held, but barely. Caleb started talking about selling the cow if things didn't improve. Eliza spent hours in the failing garden, trying to coax life out of dirt that had given up. They stopped talking about the future. too risky. Planning required hope, and hope felt like a luxury they couldn't afford. One afternoon, Eliza was hauling water when she heard shouting from the barn. She dropped the bucket and ran. Caleb was inside, wrestling with a section of collapsed roof beam. It had come down on the milking stall, missing the cow by inches. He was trying to lift it alone, his face red with effort. "Move," Eliza said, grabbing the other end. "Too heavy. I said move." Together, they hauled the beam up and off to the side. It crashed into the dirt, and Caleb bent over, hands on his knees, breathing hard. "You all right?" Eliza asked. "Fine." He straightened, looking at the damaged roof. "That's going to take 2 days to fix. Maybe more." "So we fix it. With what money? I'm tapped out until the cattle sell, and that's not for another month." Eliza looked at the beam, then at Caleb. "I have some saved." "No. It's my ranch too now, or it will be once we get those papers signed. We're not using your money to fix my mistakes." "It's not your mistake. It's weather. Bad luck." She crossed her arms. "And if we don't fix it, the whole barn could come down. Then we're really in trouble." Caleb ran a hand through his hair, frustrated. "I don't like taking money from you." "Then consider it an investment, partner to partner." He looked at her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, but I'm paying you back." "Fine. Add it to my share of the profit." "What profit?" "Exactly." Despite everything, Caleb almost smiled. They spent the next 3 days rebuilding the roof. It was brutal work, hauling lumber, hammering in the heat, climbing up and down until Eliza's legs shook. But when it was done, the barn stood solid again. Small victories. That's all they had. On the 4th day, a storm rolled in. Not rain, just wind and dust, turning the sky brown and the air thick enough to choke on. Eliza and Caleb battened down everything they could, then retreated inside as the wind howled. They sat at the table, listening to the house groan under the assault. Dust seeped in through every crack, coating surfaces in a fine layer of grit. "How long do these usually last?" Eliza asked. "Hours, sometimes days. And we just wait?" Not much else to do. The storm raged on. Evening came, but the darkness felt heavier than usual. Eliza lit a lamp, though it barely pushed back the gloom. "Tell me something," she said, needing to fill the silence. "Why'd you really buy this place? You could have gone anywhere. Why here?" Caleb leaned back in his chair, considering. "My father was a ranch hand, worked for other men his whole life, died without owning anything except his saddle and a pocket watch." He paused. "I didn't want that. Wanted to own something that was mine, even if it killed me trying. Might still kill you." "Yeah, but it'll be my death, not someone else's." Eliza understood that more than she wanted to admit. "Your turn," Caleb said. "Why'd you really leave Philadelphia? And don't say it was just the job." She hesitated, then figured he'd earned honesty. "There was a man, a client's son. He said he loved me, promised marriage. I believed him." Her voice went flat. "Turned out he was already engaged to someone else. When I confronted him, he laughed, said I should have known better than to think someone like him would marry someone like me." Caleb's expression darkened. "What did you do?" "Slapped him. Lost my job. My sister's husband found out about the whole thing and decided I was a liability to their reputation." She met Caleb's eyes. "So when Thomas Garrett's cousin showed me those letters, it felt like a way out. A fresh start where nobody knew me as the girl who'd been stupid enough to fall for pretty words." "You weren't stupid." "Felt like it." "He was a coward and a liar. That's not on you." Eliza wanted to believe that. Some days she did. Other days, Margaret's voice echoed in her head, telling her this was all her fault for being reckless. The wind screamed outside and something heavy hit the side of the house. Caleb stood up. "I need to check the barn." "In this?" "Can't risk it coming apart." "Then I'm coming with you." "Eliza, we're partners, remember? That means we're both stupid enough to go out in a dust storm." He almost argued, then grabbed a second scarf instead. "Cover your face and stay close." They stepped into the maelstrom. The wind hit like a physical force, shoving Eliza sideways. She grabbed onto Caleb's arm, and they stumbled toward the barn together. Visibility was maybe 5 feet. The world had turned into a churning wall of brown. The barn door hung open, banging in the wind. That's what had hit the house. Caleb fought to close it while Eliza checked on the cow. The animal was terrified, eyes rolling, but unhurt. She spoke to it quietly, hands on its flank, until it calmed slightly. "We're good," she shouted over the wind. Caleb secured the door and they fought their way back to the house. Once inside, they both bent over, coughing out dust, pulling the scarves from their faces. "You all right?" Caleb asked between coughs. "Been better." They cleaned up as best they could, washing their faces and hands, trying to get the grit out of their mouths. The storm showed no signs of stopping. "Might as well try to sleep," Caleb said. "Nothing else we can do tonight." But neither of them moved toward their rooms. They sat at the table instead, listening to the wind tear at the house, each lost in their own thoughts. "You ever regret it?" Eliza asked finally. "Buying this place?" "Every day." Caleb looked at her. "But I'd regret not trying more." "Even if you lose everything?" "Even then." Eliza nodded slowly. She understood that too. The storm blew itself out by morning, leaving the world coated in a thick layer of dust. Eliza and Caleb spent the day digging out, shoveling the porch, checking for damage, making sure the animals had survived. The garden was buried, completely buried. Eliza stood looking at it, feeling something crack inside her chest. 3 months of work. Gone. "We can replant," Caleb said quietly. "With what seeds? What water? We'll figure it out." "Stop saying that." Her voice came out sharper than intended. "Stop acting like everything's going to be fine when we both know it's not." Caleb was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You're right. It's not fine. Hasn't been fine since I bought this place. Probably won't be fine for a long time." He turned to face her. "But we're still here. That counts for something." "Does it?" "Yeah, it does." Eliza wanted to scream at him, wanted to rage at the unfairness of working this hard for so little return, but the anger wouldn't come, just exhaustion. "I'm tired, Caleb. I know. I don't know how much longer I can do this. One more day." His voice was steady. "That's all we need to manage. One more day." It was the same thing he'd been saying for months. One more day. One more week. One more season. Eliza had started to hate those words, but she also didn't know what else to do except keep going. The cattle sale was supposed to save them. Caleb had been planning it for weeks, a small herd he'd been raising since before Eliza arrived. Not much, but enough to cover debts and buy supplies for winter. They drove the cattle into town on a Tuesday, arriving at the stockyard before dawn. Other ranchers were already there, animals milling in dusty pens, men talking prices and weather. Eliza stayed with the wagon while Caleb handled negotiations. She watched him move through the crowd, shaking hands, nodding at prices she couldn't hear. He looked confident, capable. He came back 2 hours later looking like someone had punched him. "What happened?" Eliza asked. "Prices dropped. Bottom fell out last week." Caleb's voice was flat. "They're offering half what I expected." "Can we survive on half?" "No." The word hung between them, heavy with implications. "What are our options?" Eliza asked. "Sell anyway and hope we can make it through winter on scraps, or hold the cattle and hope prices recover before we run out of money to feed them. Which are you going to do?" Caleb looked at the cattle, then at her. "I don't know." For the first time since she'd met him, he looked lost. "Sell," Eliza said. "What?" "Sell them. Take the money. We'll make it work." "You don't know that." "Neither do you, but at least with cash we have options. With cattle eating through our feed, we just have more mouths we can't afford." Caleb studied her face. "You're sure?" "No, but I'm practical." He almost smiled at that. "All right, we sell." The transaction took another hour. When it was done, Caleb had a roll of bills that felt too thin for the work they represented. They stopped at the general store on the way out of town, buying only essentials: flour, salt, a small bag of seed for replanting. Every purchase was measured, weighed against need. Eliza was loading the last of it into the wagon when she heard a familiar voice. "Well, well, if it isn't little Eliza Hartwell." She turned to find Thomas Garrett standing 10 feet away. He looked exactly as she'd imagined from his letters: average height, brown hair, pleasant enough face. Nothing special. Nothing that explained why she'd risked everything to come here. "Mr. Garrett," she said, keeping her voice level. Heard you made it to Montana after all. He smiled, and it didn't reach his eyes. Sorry about the mix-up. Sent that letter as soon as I realized. 3 months too late. Yes, well, circumstances change. He glanced past her at Caleb, who'd appeared from the store. I see you landed on your feet. No thanks to you. Garrett had the audacity to look offended. I offered you an honest explanation. Not my fault you chose to stay out here anyway. Caleb moved to stand beside Eliza, his presence solid and steadying. You got business with us, Garrett, or are you just here to run your mouth? Just being friendly? Try it somewhere else. Garrett's smile faded. Heard you two are living together. Unmarried, that must make for interesting conversation in town. Funny, Caleb said, his voice dangerously quiet. I don't remember asking for your opinion on how I run my ranch. Just saying, people talk. Let them. Caleb's hand moved to rest on Eliza's shoulder. Not possessive, just there. We're not interested in what small men think. Garrett's face reddened. For a moment, Eliza thought he might say something else. But he just tipped his hat and walked away, disappearing into the crowd. Eliza let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. You all right? Caleb asked. I'm fine. She climbed into the wagon. Let's go home. The words slipped out without thinking. Home. Not the ranch, not Caleb's place. Home. If Caleb noticed, he didn't mention it. They rode back in silence, the wagon creaking under the weight of their meager supplies. The sun beat down, relentless as always. By the time they reached the ranch, both of them were coated in dust and exhausted. That night, Eliza couldn't sleep. She lay in her narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Thomas Garrett's smug face, about Margaret's letters, about every person who'd looked at her choices and found them lacking. Around midnight, she gave up and went to the kitchen for water. Caleb was already there, sitting at the table in the dark. Can't sleep either? Eliza asked. Thinking too much. She sat down across from him. About money? Among other things. He looked at her. You ever wonder if we're fools for trying? Every day? But you're still here. So are you. Caleb nodded slowly. Saw the way Garrett looked at you today, like you were something he'd thrown away and was surprised to find still functional. I noticed. Made me want to hit him. Would have been satisfying. Yeah. Caleb was quiet for a moment. You know you're worth 10 of him, right? Eliza felt her throat tighten. Caleb, I mean it. That man walked away from someone who would have made his life better in every way. That's not your failure, that's his. She didn't know what to say to that, didn't trust her voice. We're going to make this work, Caleb continued. The ranch, the partnership, all of it. I don't know how yet, but we will. You sound certain. I am, because we're both too stubborn to quit. Eliza laughed despite herself. That's your business plan? Stubbornness? It's gotten us this far. Fair point. They sat in the darkness, not talking, just being. And for the first time in weeks, Eliza felt something like hope. It was fragile, uncertain, but it was there, and maybe that was enough to get them through one more day. The hope lasted exactly 6 days. That's when the letter arrived from the Territorial Land Office, delivered by a different rider this time, younger, official-looking, with a leather satchel that screamed government business. Caleb signed for it, his face going still as he read the heading. What is it? Eliza asked from the garden, where she'd been trying to coax new growth from the replanted seeds. He didn't answer right away. Just stood there on the porch, reading the same page over and over like the words might change if he stared hard enough. Eliza walked over, wiping dirt from her hands. Caleb. Survey notice. His voice was flat. Territories reassessing land boundaries. They're sending someone out here in 3 weeks to verify property lines. That's routine, isn't it? Should be. He handed her the letter. But look at the signature. Eliza scanned down to the bottom. The name meant nothing to her, but the title did. Commissioner of Territorial Affairs. Not some low-level clerk. Someone with authority. Why would a commissioner care about one ranch? She asked. That's what worries me. They spent the evening going through Caleb's papers, the deed, the sale agreement, every scrap of documentation related to the property. Everything looked legitimate. Garrett had sold the land clean, or so it seemed. but Eliza couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. "When did you last see the original survey markers?" she asked. Caleb looked up from the papers. "When I bought the place, Garrett showed me the corners, we walked the lines, all accounted for." "You trust him to have shown you the right ones?" "Didn't have much choice. Man was selling, I was buying, had to take his word." Eliza set down the deed she'd been examining. "We should walk them ourselves, before the surveyor gets here. Make sure we know what we're dealing with. That's 3 days of work minimum. Then we better start tomorrow." Caleb studied her face, then nodded. "All right." We walked the lines. They started at dawn, following the fence post that marked the northern boundary. The land was rough, rocky in places, thick with scrub brush in others. Eliza carried a canteen and a notebook, marking down anything that seemed off. By midday, they'd covered maybe a third of the northern line and found the first problem. The survey marker, a stone cairn that should have been at the northwest corner, was missing, not fallen apart, just gone, like someone had deliberately removed it. Caleb stood where it should have been, turning in a slow circle. "This doesn't make sense. Could it have been moved? Why would anyone move it?" "I don't know, but it's not here." They kept walking, checking the western boundary next. 2 more markers were missing. The ones that remained looked old, weathered, like they'd been there for years, but the gaps were obvious. "This is deliberate," Eliza said, her stomach nodding. "Someone's been tampering with your property lines, or Garrett never set them properly in the first place." Caleb's jaw was tight. If the surveyor comes out here and can't verify the boundaries, they could invalidate the whole deed. Can they do that? Territory's been cracking down on fraudulent claims. If they think Garrett sold me land he didn't legally own, he didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. Eliza felt cold despite the heat. What happens if they invalidate it? "I lose everything. The land goes back to territorial control. They auction it off to whoever bids highest." He looked at her. "And you lose whatever stake you thought you had in this place." "Then we fix it." "How?" "We can't recreate markers that were never properly set." "No," Eliza said slowly, an idea forming. "But we can prove where they should be. Garrett had to have some record. He sold this place legally. There must have been original survey documents. If there were, he took them with him." "Maybe. Or maybe they're filed with the land office." She grabbed Caleb's arm. "We need to go back to town, check the records. If we can find the original survey, we can show the commissioner exactly where the boundaries are supposed to be." Caleb looked at her like she'd suggested they fly to the moon. "You think they're just going to hand over those documents?" "I think we don't have another choice." He was quiet for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, we ride out tomorrow." That night, Eliza barely slept. Her mind kept running through scenarios, each worse than the last. Losing the ranch meant losing everything they'd built. For Caleb, it meant years of work destroyed. For her, it meant being right back where she started. No home, no prospects, no future. She wouldn't survive that again. Couldn't. Around 3 in the morning, she gave up on sleep and went to the kitchen. Caleb was already there, bent over his papers again, a lamp burning low on the table. "Finding anything?" she asked. "Nothing useful." He rubbed his eyes. "I keep thinking there's something I missed, some clause or condition I didn't read carefully enough." Eliza sat down across from him. "This isn't your fault." "Feels like it is. Garrett sold you this land. If anyone's at fault, it's him. Doesn't matter whose fault it is if I still lose it." She reached across the table, covering his hand with hers. "We're not losing it. We're going to fight." Caleb looked at their hands, then at her face. "Why?" "What?" "Why are you fighting for this? You could walk away, take what you've saved, and start over somewhere else. Hell, go back to your sister if you have to. But you're staying. Why?" Eliza pulled her hand back, crossing her arms. "Because I'm tired of running, tired of letting other people decide what I'm worth." She met his eyes. "And because this is mine too now. Maybe not legally yet, but it is. I've bled for this land. Worked until I couldn't stand. I'm not giving it up without a fight." Something shifted in Caleb's expression. Relief, maybe, or gratitude. "All right then, we fight." They rode into town the next morning, arriving at the land office just after it opened. The clerk behind the desk was a thin man with spectacles and the kind of mustache that suggested he took himself very seriously. "Help you?" he asked, barely looking up from his ledger. Need to see survey records for a property, Caleb said. Parcel 47, Northern District. The clerk's pen paused. That's Ward property now, isn't it? It is. And you are? Caleb Ward. I own it. The clerk set down his pen, finally looking at them properly. Survey records are territorial property. Can't just hand them out to anyone who asks. I'm not anyone. I'm the legal owner requesting documentation related to my land. Still need authorization from the commissioner's office. Eliza stepped forward. The commissioner's office sent us a survey notice. We're trying to prepare for it. Surely that counts as authorization. The clerk's eyes flicked to her, then back to Caleb. That your wife? My business partner. Right. The word dripped with skepticism. Look, I can't help you without proper authorization. Come back with a signed request from the commissioner and we'll see what we can do. The commissioner's office is 2 days' ride from here, Caleb said, his voice tight. We don't have that kind of time. Not my problem. Eliza felt her temper flare. Actually, it is your problem. Because if we can't verify those boundaries and the survey fails, the territory loses a tax-paying property owner. I doubt the commissioner will appreciate that. The clerk's mustache twitched. Are you threatening me? I'm explaining consequences. She kept her voice level, professional. We're asking for help navigating a bureaucratic process. Surely there's some way to access those records without making us ride for 4 days. The clerk studied her, clearly trying to decide if she was worth the effort. Finally, he sighed. Wait here. He disappeared into a back room, and Eliza heard shuffling, muttering, the sound of drawers opening and closing. 10 minutes later, he returned with a dusty folder. Survey from 1871, he said, dropping it on the counter. Original claim before Garrett bought it. Best I can do without authorization. Caleb opened the folder carefully. Inside were hand-drawn maps, measurements, descriptions of marker placements. It was detailed, thorough, and exactly what they needed. Can we copy this? Eliza asked. The clerk sighed again. You've got 1 hour. There's paper and ink over there. Don't damage the originals. They worked fast, Eliza sketching the maps while Caleb copied the measurements. Her hand cramped, but she didn't stop. Every line, every notation, it all mattered. By the time they finished, her fingers were stained with ink and shaking from the effort. But they had copies. Proof of where the boundaries should be. This good enough? Caleb asked as they walked back to the wagon. It has to be. They spent the next 2 weeks preparing. Using the copied survey, they retraced the property lines, marking where the missing cairn should have been with wooden stakes and carved notations. It was exhausting work, made worse by the heat and the constant worry that it wouldn't be enough. Eliza pushed through anyway. They both did. 3 days before the surveyor was due to arrive, Rollins showed up again. He didn't bother with pleasantries this time. Just rode up to where Caleb was working on the fence and said, Heard you're having boundary troubles. Caleb straightened, hammer still in hand. Word travels fast. Town small, people talk. Rollins dismounted, looking at the stakes they'd placed. That's a lot of work for something that might not matter. It'll matter. Maybe. Maybe not. Rollins pulled a flask from his pocket, took a drink. Got a proposition for you. Not interested. Hear me out. I've got capital. You've got land. Or you might, depending on how this survey goes. If things don't work out for you, I'd be willing to buy what's left. Fair price. Keep you from losing everything. Caleb's grip on the hammer tightened. What makes you think I'm selling? Just being practical. Survey could go either way. If it goes against you, better to sell what you can than walk away with nothing. And if it goes in my favor, Rollins smiled, then you don't need my offer. But the offer stands either way. Think about it. He rode off, leaving Caleb standing there looking like he wanted to throw the hammer after him. Eliza emerged from the barn, having heard the whole exchange. You're not seriously considering that. No. Caleb went back to hammering, harder than necessary. But he's right about one thing. If this goes wrong, we're going to be in a bad spot. Then we make sure it doesn't go wrong. And if we can't? Eliza picked up a stake, positioning it where the next fence post would go. Then we deal with it, together. Caleb looked at her, and something in his expression softened. You know you don't have to stay, right? If this falls apart, I'm staying. Eliza, I said I'm staying. She met his eyes. Stop trying to give me an out. I don't want one. He nodded slowly, then went back to work. But Eliza caught the smallest hint of relief on his face before he turned away. The surveyor arrived on a Wednesday, riding a horse that looked too expensive for government work. He was younger than Eliza expected, maybe 30, with carefully groomed hair and clothes that suggested he'd never worked a day in his life. His name was Porter, and he introduced himself with the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mr. Ward, I presume?" He dismounted, pulling out a leather-bound notebook. "Shall we get started?" "Right to business, then," Caleb said. "I find it's best. Less room for misunderstandings." They walked the property, Porter taking measurements and comparing them to whatever was in his notebook. He didn't speak much, just made notes and moved to the next marker. Eliza and Caleb followed, tense and silent. At the northwest corner, where the first cairn had been missing, Porter stopped. "There should be a marker here," he said, consulting his notes. "There should be," Caleb agreed. "But it's not. We think it was removed." "By whom?" "Don't know. Could have been the previous owner, could have been vandals, could have been weather. But we found the original survey documents." He pulled out their copied maps. "This is where it should be." Porter took the papers, examining them with an expression that gave nothing away. "These are copies. Originals are at the land office. Clerk can verify." "I'll need to do that." Porter made another note. "Continue." They walked the rest of the boundaries, finding similar issues at each missing marker. Every time Caleb produced the survey documents, showing where the markers should have been. Porter took it all down, his face impassive. By the time they finished, the sun was setting. "I'll need to file my report with the commissioner," Porter said, tucking his notebook away. "Should have an answer within 2 weeks." 2 weeks? Eliza couldn't keep the shock from her voice. "We're supposed to just wait, not knowing if we still own this land?" Porter gave her a look that was equal parts condescending and dismissive. "The territorial government doesn't operate on individual timelines, miss. These things take time." "We understand that," Caleb cut in before Eliza could respond. "But this is our livelihood, our home. Surely there's some way to expedite. File an appeal with the commissioner if you want faster service. Though I should warn you, appeals rarely go anywhere." Porter mounted his horse. "Good day." He rode off, leaving them standing in the dust. Eliza wanted to scream, wanted to chase after him and demand answers. But Caleb's hand on her shoulder stopped her. "Let him go," he said quietly. "He's going to take 2 weeks to decide if we lose everything." "I know. And we just have to wait?" "Yeah," Caleb's voice was rough. "We wait." Those 2 weeks were the longest of Eliza's life. They tried to work, tried to maintain routines, but everything felt hollow. Every task was shadowed by the knowledge that it might not matter, that all of this, the garden, the fences, the careful repairs, could be stripped away by a bureaucrat's signature. Caleb grew quieter, more withdrawn. He'd disappear for hours, walking the property lines like he could will them into permanence through sheer force of presence. Eliza threw herself into work. She repaired things that didn't need repairing, cleaned spaces that were already clean, anything to keep her hands busy and her mind from spiraling. At night they sat at the table in silence, neither able to voice the fear that hung between them. On the 10th day, Eliza found Caleb in the barn, sitting on a hay bale with his head in his hands. She sat down beside him without a word. After a long moment, he spoke. "I can't lose this place." "I know. I've lost things before, jobs, money, people, but this," his voice cracked, "this is everything." Eliza put her hand on his back, feeling the tension in his shoulders. "We're going to fight this. Whatever Porter's report says, we fight." "How?" "We don't have money for lawyers. Don't have connections in the territorial government. We have the truth. We have those survey documents. We have proof that the boundaries are legitimate." "And if that's not enough?" She didn't have an answer for that. They sat in the quiet barn, the weight of uncertainty pressing down on them both. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades that would have been beautiful if either of them had been able to appreciate it. "I'm sorry," Caleb said finally. "For what?" "For bringing you into this mess. You could have been halfway back east by now if I hadn't offered you that first meal." Eliza turned to look at him. "You really think I'd be better off serving tea in my sister's house?" "You'd be safe." "I'd be miserable." She grabbed his hand, forcing him to look at her. "I chose this, Caleb. Chose to stay. Chose to work. Chose to fight for this place. That's not on you. That's on me. Why though? Why choose this? Because for the first time in my life, I'm building something that's mine. Not someone else's dream, not someone else's rules, mine. She squeezed his hand. And I'm not giving that up without a fight. Caleb's eyes were bright in the dim light. You're something else, you know that? So are you. They sat there as darkness fell, hands still joined, drawing strength from each other in the only way they knew how. The answer came on day 13. Not from Porter, from Rollins, of all people, writing up with an envelope he clearly enjoyed delivering. Thought you'd want to see this, he said, handing it to Caleb. Came through the post office this morning. Caleb tore it open, Eliza reading over his shoulder. The letter was brief, almost cruelly brief. The survey had found inconsistencies in the property markers. The territorial office was recommending further investigation. In the meantime, Ward's claim to the disputed sections of land was under review. Disputed sections. Not the whole property, just sections. What does that mean? Eliza asked. Caleb scanned the letter again. Means they're not taking the whole thing, yet. But they're questioning my claim to about 40 acres on the western boundary. Can they do that? They just did? Rollins was still sitting on his horse, watching them. Shame about the western section. That's the best grazing land you've got. Caleb looked up at him. You knew about this? Heard rumors. From who? Around. Rollins shrugged. Like I said before, my offer still stands. Might be worth considering now. Get off my land. It's not all your land anymore, apparently. Get off. Rollins smiled, tipped his hat, and rode away. Eliza felt sick. 40 acres, that's a third of the grazing land, maybe more. Caleb crumpled the letter in his fist. Without it, I can't support enough cattle to make this place profitable. So we appeal, like Porter said. Appeals take months, cost money we don't have. Then we find the money. How? Caleb's voice rose, frustration finally breaking through. We're barely scraping by as it is. Where exactly are we supposed to get funds for lawyers and filing fees and all the rest of it? Eliza didn't answer, because he was right. They had nothing left to sell, nothing left to leverage. They were trapped. That night, neither of them could eat. They sat at the table, the crumpled letter between them, trying to think of solutions that didn't exist. Maybe Rollins is right, Caleb said quietly. Don't. Maybe the smart thing is to sell what we can, take what money we get and start over somewhere else. Is that what you want? Eliza's voice was sharp. To give up? I want to survive. There's a difference. No, there's not. Not for us. She stood up, pacing. We've survived every damn thing this land has thrown at us. Drought, dust storms, money problems. We survived all of it. And now you want to quit because some bureaucrat says we might lose 40 acres? It's not just 40 acres. I know what it is, but we've built something here, Caleb. Something real. And I'm not walking away from it. Then what do you suggest we do? Eliza stopped pacing, an idea forming that was probably insane but might be their only shot. We go over Porter's head, straight to the commissioner. The commissioner won't see us. Then we make him see us. We show up at his office with every piece of documentation we have. We demand a hearing. We make enough noise that ignoring us becomes harder than just dealing with us. Caleb stared at her. That's your plan? Make a scene? You have a better one? He didn't. They both knew it. After a long moment, Caleb nodded. All right, we ride to the Capitol, make our case. When? Soon as we can pack supplies. Eliza felt something like relief flood through her. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was something, and something was better than surrender. They spent the rest of the night preparing, gathering documents, rehearsing arguments. By dawn, they were ready. As they loaded the wagon, Eliza looked back at the ranch, the house, the barn, the land they'd fought so hard for. It looked small in the morning light, fragile, but it was theirs. And she'd be damned if she'd let anyone take it without a fight. The Capitol was 3 days' ride southeast, through country that made their ranch look hospitable by comparison. They traveled light, bedrolls, supplies for a week, and a leather satchel containing every document that might save them. The wagon stayed behind. They needed speed more than comfort. The first day passed without incident. They rode in silence mostly, each lost in thoughts neither wanted to voice. Eliza's back ached from hours in the saddle. She'd gotten better at riding over the months, but long distances still punished her. Caleb noticed her shifting uncomfortably around midday. "We can stop." "I'm fine." "You're not, and there's no point arriving too sore to walk." They made camp early, near a creek that was more mud than water. Eliza slid off her horse with a groan she couldn't suppress. Everything hurt. "Here." Caleb handed her the canteen. "Drink, then rest. I'll handle the horses." She wanted to argue, to insist on pulling her weight, but her body had other ideas. She sat heavily on a flat rock and drank, watching Caleb move through the routine of making camp with practiced efficiency. "You've done this before," she said. "Spent half my life on the trail, working cattle, moving between ranches." He unsaddled his horse, checking its hooves. "Never thought I'd be doing it to beg bureaucrats for something that's already mine." "We're not begging, we're demanding what's ours." "You really think they'll listen?" "They have to." Eliza set down the canteen. "We have proof, documentation, everything they should need to make this right." Should being the key word, Caleb started building a fire. Government doesn't always work on shoulds. "Then we make them." He looked at her across the small clearing, firelight catching in his eyes. "You don't give up, do you?" "Neither do you." "Sometimes I wonder if that's stubbornness or stupidity." "Both, probably." Eliza pulled out the jerky they'd packed. "But it's kept us alive this long." They ate in silence, too tired for conversation. The sun set, painting the sky in colors that reminded Eliza of better evenings on the ranch porch. She pushed the thought away. No point getting sentimental about a place they might lose. "What'll you do?" Caleb asked suddenly. "If this goes wrong?" "I told you, I'm not leaving." "Even if there's nothing left to stay for?" Eliza met his eyes. "Is that what you're planning? To give up if the commissioner says no?" "I'm planning for reality. If they take that 40 acres, the ranch isn't viable. Can't support cattle, can't generate income, might as well be empty land." "Then we find another way. Farming, contract work. I don't know, but we don't quit." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You're going to get yourself hurt one of these days. All this hope. Better than giving up before the fight's over. The fight might already be over. We just don't know it yet." Eliza threw a small stone at him. It bounced off his boot. "Stop being so damn pessimistic." "I'm being realistic. You're being defeatist. There's a difference." She stood up, stretching her sore muscles. "We're riding to the Capitol because we believe we can win this. The moment you stop believing that, we might as well turn around." Caleb looked at her for a long moment, then shook his head. "How do you do that?" "Do what?" "Keep believing when everything's falling apart. Because the alternative is accepting that everything we've built means nothing. And I'm not ready to do that." She walked over to where he sat, lowering herself carefully beside him. "Are you?" "No." His voice was rough. "No, I'm not." "Then stop talking like we've already lost." They sat together as darkness settled around them, the fire crackling between them and the unknown that waited ahead. The second day was harder. The road deteriorated into little more than a track, rutted and uneven. They had to dismount and lead the horses through the worst sections, adding hours to their journey. Around noon, they encountered another traveler, an old man driving a cart loaded with furs. He eyed them with the wariness of someone who'd learned not to trust strangers. "You heading to the Capitol?" he asked, pulling his cart to a stop. "We are," Caleb said. "Road always this bad?" "Worse after rain. You picked a good week." The old man spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "What's your business there?" "If you don't mind me asking." "Land dispute. Need to see the commissioner." The old man laughed, a harsh sound. "Good luck with that. Been trying to get an audience with that man for 3 months. He don't see folks like us." "What do you mean, folks like us?" Eliza asked. "Common people. Ranchers, farmers, traders. Far as the commissioner's concerned, we're just noise." He adjusted his grip on the reins. "You got connections? Money to grease palms?" "No." "Then you're wasting your time." He clicked his tongue at his horse. "But what do I know? Maybe you'll get lucky." He drove off, leaving them standing in the road. "That was encouraging," Eliza said dryly. "He's one person. Doesn't mean he's right." But he might be. Caleb started walking again, leading his horse around a particularly deep rut. Probably is, but we came this far. Might as well see it through. They made camp that night near an abandoned homestead, just the shell of a house and a collapsed barn, evidence of someone else's failed dream. Eliza tried not to see it as an omen. "Wonder what happened to them," she said, staring at the ruins. "Same thing that happens to most people out here. Ran out of money, ran out of luck, or both." Caleb built the fire inside the shell of the house, using the remaining walls as a windbreak. Territory's full of places like this, dreams that didn't pan out. "You think that'll be us?" "I think it might be. Yeah." Eliza flinched at the honesty. "You could lie. Make me feel better. You don't want lies. You want the truth, even when it's hard." He looked at her across the fire. "That's who you are." "Maybe I'd rather be someone who gets comforted once in a while." "No, you wouldn't. You'd hate it." He was right, damn him. Eliza wrapped her blanket tighter and stared at the flames. "When did you get so good at reading people?" "Had to learn. Spent enough years working for men who'd cheat you soon as look at you. You learn to see what people are made of pretty quick." "And what am I made of?" Caleb considered. "Steel and stubbornness, with just enough fear underneath to keep you honest. That's supposed to be a compliment? It's the truth. Take it however you want." Eliza threw another stick on the fire. "You're made of the same thing, you know, maybe with more silence and less talk." Fair assessment. They sat in the ruins of someone else's failure, two people who refused to become another cautionary tale. It should have felt hopeless. Instead, it felt like kinship. The capital appeared on the horizon late on the third day, a sprawl of buildings that looked both impressive and shabby depending on the angle. The territorial government had set up shop in what used to be a fort, and the military precision still showed in the layout of the streets. They found a boarding house that didn't look too expensive and took a room. The proprietor, a thin woman with suspicious eyes, made it clear she expected payment up front. "We're not married," Eliza said, catching the woman's look. "We'll need 2 rooms." "Only got 1 available. Take it or leave it." Caleb pulled out coins. "We'll take it." The room was small, barely enough space for the single bed and a washstand. They stood in the doorway, both realizing the problem at the same time. "I'll sleep on the floor," Caleb said. "Don't be ridiculous. We'll figure it out." "Eliza, we're adults. We've been working side by side for months. I think we can manage sharing a room for a few nights without scandal." She pushed past him into the space. "Besides, we've got bigger problems than sleeping arrangements." Caleb looked like he wanted to argue, but he just nodded and set down his pack. They spent the evening preparing for the next day. Eliza laid out all their documents on the bed, organizing them by date and relevance. Caleb rehearsed what he'd say, pacing the small room until Eliza thought she'd go mad. "Stop," she finally said. "You're making me anxious. I need to get this right." "You will. You know this land better than anyone. You know what's ours and what they're trying to take. Just tell them that." "It's not that simple." "It is, actually. The surveyor found inconsistencies because someone tampered with the markers. We have the original documentation proving where the boundaries should be. That's all you need to say." Caleb stopped pacing. "What if they don't care?" "Then we make them care." "How?" Eliza stood up, facing him. "By not leaving until they give us an answer. By making ourselves impossible to ignore. By being so persistent and so right that it's easier to help us than to keep putting us off." "You make it sound simple." "Maybe it is. Maybe we're overthinking this." Caleb looked at her, something like admiration in his expression. "When did you get so brave?" "I'm not brave. I'm desperate. There's a difference." "I don't think there is." That night, Eliza took the bed while Caleb made a pallet on the floor using his blanket. She protested, but he insisted, and she was too tired to fight. She fell asleep to the sound of him shifting on the hardboards, trying to get comfortable. She woke in the middle of the night to find him sitting by the window, staring out at the dark street. "Can't sleep?" she asked quietly. "Keep thinking about what we say tomorrow, how we make them listen." Eliza sat up, pulling the blanket around her shoulders. "Come here." "What?" "The floor's miserable. There's room up here. We're both exhausted. Stop being noble and get some sleep." Caleb hesitated, then moved to the bed, lying down on top of the covers on the far edge. They lay there in the darkness, careful not to touch, both staring at the ceiling. "Thank you," he said after a while. "For what?" "For not giving up on this. On me." Eliza turned her head to look at him. "We're in this together. That was the deal." "Still, you could have walked away a dozen times. So could you." "Not really. It's my land. Was from the start. It's our land now." She said it firmly, like saying it made it true. "Whatever happens tomorrow, that doesn't change." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "I'm glad you stayed. That first day. When Garrett left you stranded. I'm glad you stayed." "Me too." They lay in the darkness, not touching but close enough to feel each other's presence, and somehow that was enough to let them both finally sleep. The territorial office opened at 8. Eliza and Caleb were there at 7:30, standing outside the heavy wooden doors with their satchel of documents and a determination that bordered on reckless. Other people arrived, clerks, officials, petitioners with their own grievances. Everyone looked tired, worn down by a system that moved at glacial pace. At precisely 8, the doors opened. They filed inside with the others, finding themselves in a large waiting room with hard benches and a single desk where a clerk sat sorting papers. "Name and business," the clerk said without looking up. "Caleb Ward, here to see Commissioner Hayes about a land dispute." The clerk made a note. "The commissioner doesn't take walk-ins. You'll need to file a petition for appointment." "How long does that take?" 4 to 6 weeks. Eliza stepped forward. "We don't have 4 to 6 weeks. The surveyor already filed his report. Our land claim is being disputed right now." The clerk finally looked up. "Then you should have filed your petition 4 to 6 weeks ago." "We only received notice 2 weeks ago." "Not my problem. File the petition or leave." Caleb put a hand on Eliza's arm before she could respond. "Where do we file?" The clerk pointed to a door on the left. "Forms are in that office. Fill them out. Submit them to the second floor. They'll process them when they can." They spent the next hour filling out forms that asked for information they'd already provided to the surveyor: name, property location, nature of dispute, supporting documentation, everything in triplicate. When they finally submitted the forms to another clerk on the second floor, they were told to expect a response in 6 to 8 weeks. 6 to 8 weeks? Eliza's voice rose. "Our claim could be invalidated by then." Should have thought of that before the dispute arose. The clerk stamped their forms with finality. Next. They left the building frustrated and no closer to a resolution. "This is insane," Eliza said as they stood on the street. "They're just going to ignore us until it's too late. That's how bureaucracy works. Slow everything down until people give up." "Well, I'm not giving up." "Didn't think you would." Caleb looked back at the building. "But we need a different approach. Direct petition isn't working." "Then what?" "We find out where Hayes goes, his routine, and we make sure we're there." "You want to ambush the commissioner?" "I want to get in front of him somewhere he can't hide behind clerks and procedures." Caleb started walking. "Come on, let's ask around." Ask. They spent the rest of the day talking to people, shop owners, other petitioners, anyone who might know Commissioner Hayes' habits. Most people were reluctant to talk, but a few were willing to share information for the price of a drink or a meal. By evening, they'd learned that Hayes ate lunch every day at a restaurant 3 blocks from the territorial office. Always at noon, always alone, and he hated being interrupted. "Perfect," Eliza said. "We interrupt him. That might get us thrown out. Or it might get us 5 minutes to make our case. Better than waiting 8 weeks. Caleb considered, then nodded. "Tomorrow, then. Noon." They arrived at the restaurant at 11:30 the next day, taking a table near the back where they could watch the door. Eliza's stomach was twisted in knots. This was their shot. Maybe their only one. Hayes arrived at noon exactly, a tall man in his 50s with silver hair and the kind of presence that commanded attention. He took his usual table by the window and ordered without looking at the menu. Eliza stood up. Caleb grabbed her wrist. "Wait," he said. "Let him settle." They waited until Hayes's food arrived. Then Caleb stood, and they crossed to his table together. "Commissioner Hayes?" Caleb's voice was respectful but firm. Hayes looked up, irritation flashing across his face. "I don't conduct business during meals." "We understand, sir, but we've been trying to get an appointment for 2 weeks with no success. Our land claim is being disputed, and we need someone to review the facts." File a petition like everyone else. We did. They told us 6 to 8 weeks. By then, our claim could be invalidated. Hayes set down his fork with deliberate care. I don't appreciate being ambushed in restaurants. We don't appreciate being ignored by a system that's supposed to protect property owners, Eliza said, her voice steady. We have documentation proving our boundaries are legitimate. We just need someone with authority to look at it. Hayes studied her, his expression unreadable. You're the ward woman? The one living on that disputed property? I'm Eliza Hartwell, business partner to Caleb Ward. And yes, we're the ones with the disputed claim. I've seen Porter's report. He found significant irregularities. Because someone tampered with the markers, Caleb said. We have the original survey documents proving where they should be. If you just look, I don't review individual cases. That's what the surveying office is for. The surveying office is the one disputing our claim, Eliza said, frustration creeping into her voice. We need an impartial review. Hayes picked up his fork again. Then file an appeal through proper channels. We're trying to, but proper channels take months, and we don't have months. That's not my concern. Hayes went back to his meal. Good day. Caleb pulled the surveyor documents from his satchel, setting them on the table. Just look at these. 5 minutes. That's all we're asking. I said good day. A waiter appeared, clearly summoned by Hayes's expression. Is there a problem, Commissioner? These people are leaving. Eliza wanted to grab the papers and force Hayes to look, wanted to scream that they deserved better than this dismissal. But Caleb's hand on her arm stopped her. Come on, he said quietly. We're done here. They left the restaurant, defeat heavy on their shoulders. Outside, Eliza turned on Caleb. We should have pushed harder. We pushed as hard as we could without getting arrested. He didn't even look at the documents. He doesn't care. That's the problem. Caleb started walking back toward the boarding house. Men like Hayes don't care about people like us. We're just noise to them. Then we get louder. Eliza, I'm serious. If he won't see us voluntarily, we make him see us. We show up every day, at his office, at that restaurant, wherever he goes. We become impossible to ignore. That could backfire. Make him dig in harder, just to prove a point. Or it could work. Because right now, ignoring us costs him nothing. But if we're constantly in his face, constantly reminding him that real people are losing their livelihoods because of bureaucratic indifference, maybe, just maybe, it becomes easier to help us than to keep brushing us off. Caleb stopped walking, studying her face. You really believe that? I have to, because the alternative is accepting that we have no power here, and I'm not ready to accept that. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded. All right, we try it your way, but we need to be smart about it. Strategic. Agreed. They spent that evening planning. They'd split up. Caleb would focus on the territorial office, trying to build relationships with the clerks and lower-level officials who might have Hayes's ear. Eliza would target the restaurant and other public places where Hayes appeared, armed with their documents and a story that couldn't be easily dismissed. It was exhausting work, soul-crushing work. But they kept at it. 3 days passed. Then 4. Hayes continued to ignore them, but other people started noticing. A clerk named Morrison began stopping to chat with Caleb, asking questions about the ranch, the dispute, the evidence they had. A waitress at the restaurant slipped Eliza information about Hayes' schedule, sympathetic to their cause. Small victories. Tiny cracks in the bureaucratic wall. On the 5th day, Morrison pulled Caleb aside in the territorial office hallway. Hayes is reviewing your file, he said quietly. Caleb's heart jumped. When? Don't know, but I saw it on his desk this morning. He's looking at it. Does that mean? It doesn't mean anything yet, but it means he's paying attention. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. Caleb found Eliza that evening and told her. She looked ready to collapse with relief. We're getting through to him, she said. Maybe. Or maybe he's just building a case to deny us officially. You're doing it again, being pessimistic. I'm being careful. There's a difference. But Eliza saw the hope in his eyes, carefully hidden, but there. He wanted this as much as she did. On the 6th day, a messenger appeared at their boarding house with a letter bearing the territorial seal. Caleb opened it with shaking hands. The letter requested their presence at Commissioner Hayes' office the following morning at 9. A formal hearing on their land dispute had been scheduled. We did it, Eliza breathed. We actually did it. We got a hearing. That's not the same as winning. But it's a chance, a real chance. Caleb pulled her into a hug without thinking. She stiffened for a moment, then relaxed, her arms coming up around him. They stood there in the shabby boarding house hallway, holding each other like lifelines, both too overwhelmed to speak. When they finally pulled apart, both were blinking back something that might have been tears. "We should prepare," Caleb said, his voice rough. "Yeah, we should. They spent the night going over everything, documents, arguments, responses to potential objections. By the time they collapsed into bed, Eliza's eyes burned with exhaustion. "Whatever happens tomorrow," she said into the darkness, "I want you to know I don't regret this. Any of it." Caleb's voice came from the floor where he'd insisted on sleeping again. "Even if we lose?" "Even then. At least we fought." "Yeah, we did." The hearing was held in a small conference room on the third floor of the territorial office. Hayes sat at the head of a long table, flanked by two other officials Eliza didn't recognize. Porter, the surveyor, sat across from them, looking smug. "Let's begin," Hayes said without preamble. "Mr. Ward, you're disputing the surveyor's findings regarding your property boundaries. State your case." Caleb stood, his hand steady despite what Eliza knew must be churning nerves. "The surveyor found irregularities because the original boundary markers had been removed or tampered with. We have documentation, the original 1871 survey, proving where those boundaries should be." He laid out the copied documents. "Every measurement, every landmark described here matches our current property lines. The 40 acres being disputed are legally ours." Porter leaned forward. "Those are copies, not originals, and even if they're accurate, the physical markers are missing. Without them, we can't verify the claim." "The markers are missing because someone removed them," Eliza said. "That's not our fault." "Can you prove someone removed them? Or did they simply erode over time? Stone cairns don't erode that completely in 15 years. You'd be surprised what weather can do." Hayes held up a hand. "The question isn't why the markers are missing. It's whether the claim can be verified without them." He looked at Caleb. "You've placed new markers based on these documents?" "Yes, sir. Wooden stakes at every location specified in the original survey." "And those match your current fence lines?" "To the foot." Hayes studied the documents, his expression giving nothing away. The silence stretched until Eliza thought she'd scream. Finally, Hayes spoke. "Porter, in your professional opinion, do these survey documents appear authentic?" Porter shifted uncomfortably. "They appear to be copies of period-appropriate survey materials, but without the originals. I asked if they appear authentic, not whether they're originals. Yes, they appear authentic." "And if the boundary markers described in these documents were present, would they support Mr. Ward's claim to the disputed 40 acres? Porter's jaw tightened. "Likely. Yes." Hayes nodded slowly. "Then I see no reason to invalidate the claim based solely on missing markers, particularly when we have documentation supporting the current boundaries." He looked at Caleb and Eliza. "I'm recommending the territorial office accept your claim as legitimate. The disputed 40 acres remain your property." Eliza felt the world tilt. "What?" "You heard me. Your claim is validated. The decision will be formalized within the week." Porter stood up. "Commissioner, with respect, this sets a dangerous precedent. If we start accepting claims without physical markers, we're accepting a claim with substantial documentary evidence and no proof of fraud. That's not a precedent. That's common sense." Hayes gathered his papers. "This hearing is concluded." Eliza couldn't move, couldn't process what had just happened. They'd won. Actually won. Caleb found his voice first. "Thank you, Commissioner." Hayes looked at him, and something almost like respect crossed his face. "You were persistent, annoying but persistent. That counts for something." He stood. "Now get out of my office and don't come back unless you have another crisis." They left in a daze, making it all the way to the street before Eliza started laughing. It came out of nowhere, half relief and half hysteria. "We did it," she said between gasps. "We actually did it." Caleb was grinning, actually grinning, something she'd rarely seen. "We did." She threw her arms around him, and this time he lifted her off the ground, spinning her once before setting her down. They were causing a scene on the street, but neither cared. "It's ours," Eliza said. "Really ours." "Yeah, it really is." They rode back to the ranch in record time, too excited to notice the discomfort or the heat. The land came into view on the third day, and Eliza felt something shift in her chest. It looked different now. Not just a place she worked, not just a place she lived. Home. They stood on the porch that evening, watching the sun set over land that was legally, officially theirs. Caleb handed her a cup of water, and she took it, their fingers brushing. "So what now?" she asked. "Now we build. For real this time, no more looking over our shoulders." "Partnership papers?" "Tomorrow. We'll ride into town, make it official." He looked at her. "Equal partners. Equal say in everything." "Equal share of the profit, too?" "What profit?" Eliza smiled. "Someday there'll be profit." "Someday." Caleb clinked his cup against hers. "Here's to someday." They drank, and Eliza felt something she hadn't felt in months. Peace. Not perfect, not permanent, but real. Whatever came next, they'd face it together. Partners. Equals. Two people who'd fought for something and won. The land stretched out before them, harsh and unforgiving and completely theirs. And that was enough. The partnership papers were signed on a Tuesday morning in the same land office where they'd fought for those survey documents months earlier. The clerk who'd been so unhelpful before processed their agreement with barely concealed surprise, stamping the documents that made Eliza Hartwell a legal co-owner of the Ward Ranch. Caleb signed first, his signature bold and certain. Then Eliza took the pen, feeling the weight of what this meant. Her name, permanent and official, tied to land that was now half hers. She signed carefully, making sure every letter was clear. "That's it then," the clerk said, handing them their copies. "Congratulations." They walked out into the summer heat, each holding papers that changed everything. "Feels different," Eliza said, having it in writing. "Good different or bad different?" "Good. Real." She folded the document carefully. "Like I can finally stop waiting for someone to take it away." "No one's taking it away." Caleb's voice was firm. "It's ours. Legally, officially, ours." They celebrated with a meal at the town's only restaurant. Nothing fancy, just stew and bread, but it felt important somehow. A marker of transition from what had been to what would be. Rollins appeared halfway through the meal, his timing as terrible as always. He pulled up a chair without invitation, settling in like they were old friends. "Heard the news," he said. "Commissioner Hayes came through for you. That's something." "It is," Caleb said, his tone making it clear he wasn't interested in conversation. "Also heard you two went into partnership. Official and everything." Rollins looked at Eliza with something between curiosity and judgment. "That's an unusual arrangement." "Not really," Eliza said. "People partner on business ventures all the time." "Sure, but usually they're not living together. Unmarried." He leaned back, making himself comfortable. "Must make for interesting talk in town." Caleb's hand tightened on his fork. "We're not interested in what people say. Maybe you should be. Reputation matters in a small community. Our reputation is that we work hard and keep our word. Everything else is noise." Rollins smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Just friendly advice. People are starting to wonder about the nature of your partnership." Eliza felt heat rise in her face, not from shame, but from anger. "Let them wonder. We're not doing anything wrong." "Didn't say you were, just saying how it looks." He stood up, tipping his hat. "Anyway, congratulations on keeping your land. Must be a relief." He left before either of them could respond. The meal felt soured after that. They finished quickly and headed back to the ranch, both lost in thoughts neither wanted to voice. That evening, Eliza found Caleb in the barn, working on repairs that didn't need immediate attention. She watched him for a moment before speaking. "He's trying to get under our skin." "I know." "Are you going to let him?" Caleb set down his hammer. "What do you want me to say, Eliza?" "That you don't care what people think." "I don't, but—" He stopped, frustrated. "This affects you more than me. You're the one people are judging. And I already told you I don't care." "You should care. Your reputation—" "My reputation is what? A woman who refused to starve or beg? Who worked for what she has instead of trading herself for security?" Eliza crossed her arms. "If that makes me scandalous in Rollins' eyes, I'll wear it like a badge." Caleb looked at her, something shifting in his expression. "You really don't care, do you?" "Not even a little bit," I stopped caring what people like him thought the moment I chose to stay here. She moved closer. The question is whether you care, whether having a female business partner is going to cause you problems. Only problem I've got is Rollins being nosy. He picked up the hammer again. Everything else is manageable, but Eliza could see the tension in his shoulders. This bothered him more than he'd admit, not because he cared about gossip, but because he cared about her. About protecting her from the kind of judgment that could make life difficult in a small community. "We could get married," she said quietly. The hammer slipped from Caleb's hand, clattering to the floor. "What?" "Married. That's what people expect, right? It would solve the reputation problem. That's the worst reason to get married I've ever heard." "Is it, though? People marry for practical reasons all the time. For land, for security, for what?" "Stop." Caleb turned to face her fully. "Just stop. You're not suggesting marriage because you want it. You're suggesting it because Rollins made you feel like you have to defend yourself." "I'm suggesting it because it makes sense. We're partners already. We live together, work together. Marriage just makes it official. Official like signing papers because you love someone, not because you're worried about gossip." His voice was sharp. "I won't do that to you. Won't trap you in something that's supposed to mean more than convenience." Eliza felt something crack in her chest. Who says it would just be convenience? Caleb went very still. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying—" She stopped, suddenly terrified. But she'd come this far. "I'm saying that somewhere between hauling water and fighting bureaucrats and building this place together, things changed. For me. And I hoped, maybe they changed for you too." The silence stretched between them, heavy with everything unsaid. Finally, Caleb spoke. "You really want to do this? Have this conversation?" "I think we have to." He moved closer, stopping just within arm's reach. "I've been careful, trying not to cross lines, trying to keep this professional because that's what you needed, what we both needed. And now? Now I don't know what we need except—" He reached out, his hand hovering near her face before dropping. "I know I don't want to marry you because Rollins thinks we should. If we do this, I want it to be because we choose it, not because we're backed into a corner by other people's expectations." Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm choosing it. I chose it the day I stayed. I chose it every morning I got up and worked beside you. I chose it fighting for this land like it was mine, because it is mine. Because you made it mine." "Eliza, I'm not asking you to marry me out of obligation. I'm asking because I want to, because I can't imagine my life without you in it anymore, and that terrifies me. But it's true." Caleb's hand finally made contact, cupping her face. His palm was rough, calloused, warm. "You're sure? Are you?" Instead of answering, he kissed her. It was tentative at first, careful, like he was afraid she'd pull away. But Eliza leaned in, her hands coming up to grip his shirt, and the carefulness dissolved into something certain and real. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. "So that's a yes?" Eliza asked. "That's a yes." Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "But we're doing this right. Not rushing because of gossip. Taking time to be sure." "I am sure." "Then we wait anyway. Court properly. Make this something we choose, not something we fall into because it's easier than fighting." Eliza wanted to argue, to say they'd already fought enough, already proven themselves. But she saw the conviction in his eyes and realized he needed this. Needed to know they were building something real, not just taking the path of least resistance. "All right," she said. "We wait. We court. We do this right." "Thank you." They stood together in the barn, the evening light filtering through gaps in the walls. And for the first time since arriving in Montana, Eliza felt completely, perfectly whole. The courting happened in the margins of their daily work. Caleb started doing small things, bringing her wildflowers from the far pasture, making sure she got the less backbreaking tasks, sitting closer on the porch in the evenings. Eliza responded in kind, mending his clothes with extra care, making his favorite meals when supplies allowed, leaving small notes tucked into his work gloves. It was ridiculous in some ways. They already knew everything about each other, had seen each other at their worst, their most exhausted, their most frustrated. But the courtship felt important anyway, a claiming of something that had been growing between them for months. 3 weeks into this new phase, Margaret's response to Eliza's last letter arrived. Eliza opened it with trepidation, knowing what was coming. She wasn't disappointed. The letter was exactly as judgmental as expected, full of horror at Eliza's choices and dire warnings about her ruined reputation. But there was something else too, a line near the end that made Eliza's breath catch. I wash my hands of you. If you insist on this shameful path, do not expect support from your family. You are making your bed, Eliza. I hope you can live with it. Eliza read it twice, then walked outside to where Caleb was fixing the porch rail. My sister has disowned me, she said, handing him the letter. Caleb read it, his expression darkening. She can't do that, your family. She just did. Eliza sat down on the porch steps, feeling strangely light, washed her hands of me, made it official. You all right? I think so. Actually, she laughed, surprising herself. I think I'm relieved. Relieved? I've been waiting for her approval, her acceptance, for so long. Even when I told myself I didn't care, part of me was still hoping she'd come around. See what I was building here and be proud. Eliza looked up at Caleb. But she's never going to see it. She's decided I'm a failure, and nothing I do will change that. So why keep trying? Caleb sat down beside her. You're not a failure. I know. That's the point. I finally know it, deep down, where it counts. I don't need her permission to be happy. Don't need her approval to know my life has value. He put his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. For what it's worth, I'm proud of you, of what you've built here. We've built. Yeah, we. They sat together on the porch of the house they'd fought for, watching the sun set over land that was theirs, and Eliza felt the last piece of her old life fall away. Margaret's rejection didn't hurt the way she'd expected. Instead, it felt like freedom. The first real rain in months came in September, turning the dry creek into a rushing torrent and the brown hills temporarily green. Eliza stood in it, face turned up to the sky, laughing like a child while Caleb watched from the porch. You're going to catch cold, he called. I don't care. At least come under the overhang before you drown. She ran to the porch, soaking wet, grinning so hard her face hurt. Caleb handed her a blanket, shaking his head but smiling. You're insane. It's raining. Actually raining. When's the last time that happened? June? Maybe July. Exactly. Eliza wrapped the blanket around herself. This means the garden will actually grow. The well will refill. We might actually make it through winter without rationing every drop. Might, if this keeps up. It did. For 3 glorious days, rain fell steadily, soaking into ground that had been parched for months. The transformation was immediate. Grass sprouting, the garden reviving, even the air smelling different. Cleaner, hopeful. They worked in the rain, reinforcing drainage, making sure the barn roof held, checking on the animals. It was cold, miserable work, but neither complained. This rain was salvation. On the 4th day, the sun returned and the world sparkled. Caleb found Eliza in the garden, examining the plants that had come back to life. Look at this, she said, pointing to tomato plants that had been skeletal days ago. They're already recovering. Amazing what water will do. Amazing what hope will do. She stood up, brushing dirt from her hands. We're going to make it, aren't we? Actually, make it. Yeah, I think we are. Caleb pulled out a small box from his pocket. Eliza's heart stuttered. I was going to wait, he said. Do this properly, maybe in town or somewhere nicer than a muddy garden, but he opened the box, revealing a simple silver ring. This feels right. Here, where we built everything. Eliza's eyes filled. Is that my mother's? Only thing of hers I kept. Been carrying it around for 2 weeks, waiting for the right moment. He took the ring out, holding it carefully. Marry me. Not because people expect it, not because it's convenient, because I love you, and I can't imagine doing any of this without you. Yes. The word came out choked. Yes, of course, yes. He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly, like it had been waiting for her all along. Eliza threw her arms around him, and they stood there in the muddy garden, holding each other while the world dried out around them. The wedding happened 6 weeks later, in town with a justice of the peace and 2 witnesses pulled from the general store. Nothing fancy, no white dress or elaborate ceremony, just Eliza in her best everyday dress and Caleb in clean clothes, standing before a tired official who'd clearly done this 100 times. Do you, Caleb Ward, take this woman, I do. You're supposed to wait for the full question. I know, but I do. The official sighed, turning to Eliza. And do you? I do. You people are impossible. Fine. By the power vested in me by the Montana Territory, I pronounce you married. You can kiss now, I guess. Caleb kissed her there in the dusty office, and it felt more real than any grand ceremony could have. When they pulled apart, Eliza was crying and laughing simultaneously. Mrs. Ward, Caleb said, testing out the name. Mrs. Ward, Eliza repeated. Sounds strange. You can keep Hartwell if you want. No, I like Ward. Eliza Ward, like a fresh start. They celebrated with dinner at the restaurant, the same place they'd confronted Commissioner Hayes. The owner, recognizing them, sent over a bottle of wine with his congratulations. It was terrible wine, but they drank it anyway, toasting to future harvests and fewer droughts, and the strange path that had brought them together. Rollins showed up, of course he did, with congratulations that felt more like vindication. Knew you'd do the right thing eventually, he said, clapping Caleb on the shoulder. We didn't do this for you or anyone else in this town, Eliza said firmly. We did it for us. Sure. Either way, glad to see you made an honest woman of her. Caleb stood up, his chair scraping loudly. Last time I'm going to say this, Rollins. Eliza was always honest. She didn't need marriage to make her respectable, and I didn't need your approval to marry her. We're done with your comments. You understand? Rollins raised his hands. No offense meant. Yeah, there was. And I'm done pretending otherwise. Leave us alone. Rollins left, and they finished their meal in peace. Walking back to the wagon later, Eliza took Caleb's hand. Thank you for saying that. Just the truth. Still, it mattered. They drove home. Eliza still thought of it as home now. Not the ranch or the property, but home. And carried their few parcels inside. The house looked the same as always. Same furniture, same layout, same slightly crooked door frame. But it felt different now. Like it had been waiting for this moment to become complete. That night, lying in bed together for the first time as husband and wife, Eliza traced the calluses on Caleb's palm. You ever think about that first day? She asked. When you found me by the wagon? Sometimes. What would you have done if I'd refused your help? Probably left you there. Figured you'd made your choice. Honest. You asked. What made you offer in the first place? Caleb was quiet for a moment. You looked like you were trying not to cry. And failing, but still trying. He stopped, searching for words. That's strength, even in breaking. I respected it. Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. I was so scared that day. I know. Thought my life was over. And now? Now I think maybe it just started. She turned to face him. Everything before was just preparation for this, for building something that's mine, ours, in a way nothing else ever was. Caleb kissed her forehead. Get some sleep. Morning comes early. It always does. But Eliza lay awake a while longer, listening to Caleb's breathing even out, feeling the weight of the ring on her finger. She'd come to Montana expecting one future and found something completely different. Better. Harder, but better. The past didn't matter anymore. Margaret's judgment, Thomas Garrett's rejection, all those years of feeling like she wasn't enough. None of it had power here. This life she'd built with Caleb, through sweat and stubbornness and sheer refusal to quit, was hers in a way nothing else had ever been. She fell asleep smiling. The first winter as a married couple was harsh but manageable. The rain had helped, giving them reserves they'd lacked the previous year. They still rationed, still worked constantly, but the edge of desperation was gone. Eliza learned to love the quiet winter evenings, when work was done and they'd sit by the fire, planning for spring. Caleb taught her to read land surveys properly, showing her how to calculate water flow and predict weather patterns from cloud formations. She taught him to mend clothes properly, to cook something other than beans and jerky, to see beauty in small things he'd stopped noticing. They weren't perfect. They fought sometimes, about money, about priorities, about whose turn it was to haul water. But the fights never lasted long, and they always ended with understanding. They'd learned each other too well for grudges to take root. Spring came early, and with it, opportunity. A neighbor 2 properties over was selling his cattle cheap, needing cash for a move east. Caleb and Eliza pooled everything they had and bought the herd, 15 head, enough to start building a real operation. It was risky. If the market dropped again, they'd lose everything. But the rain had held through winter, the grass was thick, and for the first time since buying the property, success felt possible instead of theoretical. "You sure about this?" Caleb asked the night before they finalized the purchase. "No, but I'm sure about us, about what we can build together." "That's not the same thing, isn't it?" Eliza looked at him across the table. "Everything we've done has been a risk. Staying here was a risk. Fighting for the land was a risk. Getting married was a risk. But we took them anyway, and we're still here." "Marriage wasn't a risk, wasn't it? Two stubborn people who barely knew each other, tying their futures together?" Caleb smiled. "Point taken. All right, we buy the cattle." They did. And for once, the gamble paid off. The cattle thrived on the spring grass. By summer, they'd added 3 calves to the herd. By fall, Caleb was talking about expansion, about buying the adjacent property if it came available. Money was still tight, but it was flowing in the right direction for the first time. They weren't rich, probably never would be, but they were stable, building something that would last. One evening in late summer, Eliza realized she hadn't thought about Philadelphia in months, hadn't wondered what her sister thought, or whether she'd made the right choice leaving. Those questions had simply stopped mattering. "You look thoughtful," Caleb said, sitting down beside her on the porch. "Just realizing how far we've come, not distance, just—" She gestured at the land stretching before them. "This is real now. Actually, real. It was always real. No, before it was survival. Now it's thriving. There's a difference." Caleb took her hand, running his thumb over her knuckles. They were still calloused, still marked by work, but they were also strong, capable. "You think we'll make it, long term?" "I think we already have. Everything else is just building on the foundation." 2 years after the wedding, Eliza gave birth to their first child, a daughter with Caleb's eyes and Eliza's stubborn chin. They named her Sarah, after Caleb's mother, and she fit into their lives like she'd always been meant to be there. Parenthood changed things, made them more careful, more forward-thinking. They couldn't afford to be reckless anymore, not with a child depending on them. But it also gave them purpose beyond themselves. They weren't just building for the present anymore. They were building a legacy. Sarah's first words were spoken in the garden Eliza had replanted 3 times. Her first steps happened in the barn Caleb had rebuilt twice. She grew up knowing the value of work, the satisfaction of building something with your own hands, the importance of partnership over dominance. When Sarah was 3, they had a son, James, loud and wild from birth. Then another daughter, 2 years after that, Margaret, named not for Eliza's sister but in defiance of her, a claiming of the name for something better. The house expanded, the herd grew, the land that had seemed barren and unforgiving slowly transformed into something productive. Not lush, it would never be lush, but sufficient, abundant in its own way. Other families moved into the area, drawn by news of good grazing land and fair prices. A school opened in town. The territory inched closer to statehood. The world was changing around them, but the ranch remained constant, a place built on work and partnership and the refusal to quit when things got hard. Eliza's sister never wrote again. Eliza didn't mourn the loss. She had a family now, one she'd built herself, and that was enough. Years later, 15, maybe 20, time blurred together, Eliza stood in the same spot where Caleb had first offered her help. The broken wagon was long gone, replaced by a barn that actually stood straight and a house that had grown to accommodate 3 children and occasional guests. Caleb found her there, moving slower now, but still strong, still capable. "What are you thinking about?" he asked. "That first day. How terrified I was. How certain I was that my life was over. And now? Now I know it was just beginning." She turned to face him. "Everything I thought I wanted, the security, the respectability, the easy path, none of that would have made me happy. I needed this, needed to build something from nothing, needed to prove to myself that I was strong enough." Caleb pulled her close. "You were always strong enough. You just needed a chance to see it." We both did. They stood together, watching the sun set over land they'd fought for, bled for, built into something that would outlast them both. Their children were in the house, arguing about whose turn it was to feed the chickens. The cattle were settling in the far pasture. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. It wasn't perfect. It had never been perfect. But it was theirs, built through choice and work and the stubborn refusal to accept defeat. "You ever regret it?" Eliza asked, "taking a chance on a stranger?" "Not once." Caleb kissed the top of her head. "Best decision I ever made." "Even when I'm stubborn?" "Especially then." They walked back to the house together, two people who'd started as strangers and become something unshakable. Behind them, the land stretched out in the fading light, marked by their labor and their love, a testament to what could be built when two people refused to quit on each other or themselves. The future was uncertain. It always was. But they'd face it the same way they'd faced everything else, together, one day at a time, building something that would last not because it was easy, but because they'd chosen it. And that, Eliza thought, as she stepped through the door of the home she'd made, was the only kind of belonging that mattered. Not given, not inherited, not promised by someone else, earned, built, chosen, hers.